Okay, let's dive in. We've got quite a stack of source material here today.
Yeah, seems like a mix. We've got articles on Ripple's recent moves, legal stuff, market action.
Right, and also a video transcript that gives us, more direct insights, community feel, future vision,
hmm
hearing from people like Brad Garlinghouse directly.
hmm So the mission today is what? To really unpack all of this.
Exactly. Pull out the key insights from these different sources, try to understand the progress Ripple and XRP have been making, and what the future might hold according to them.
And there's one prediction in there that really stands out, doesn't it?
You mean the big headline one? Yeah, let's start there. It definitely catches the eye.
Well, yeah, straight from the sources, specifically a Fox Business interview with Brad Garlinghouse. He pretty much put a date on it.
Which was?
He said he expects an XRP ETF, an exchange-traded fund, sometime in 2025.
Wow, okay. 2025. That's putting a stake in the ground.
Definitely. For anyone watching this space, that's a pretty specific and frankly bold prediction for the near term.
An XRP ETF next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, sets expectations high. And the sources we looked at, they seem to sort of link that prediction back to some concrete things that have just happened, right?
They do. It's like these recent events are framed as maybe the building blocks or steps towards something like an ETF, showing momentum.
So what are these building blocks? What's the first big one the sources mention?
Well, probably the most fundamental piece mentioned was finally resolving that long-running legal fight with the SEC.
Ah, the big one. That's been hanging over them since, what, 2020?
Exactly. The sources report that on May 8th, a settlement was reached involving Ripple, Garlinghouse, and Chris Larson.
And did the sources give any details on the terms? What did that settlement look like?
Yeah, the material we have indicates a payment of $50 million to the
Yeah,
SEC.
okay.
But interestingly, it also mentions $75 million being returned to Ripple.
Return to Ripple. Huh.
Yeah. So the sources suggest this settlement, with those specific numbers, basically closed the book on one of the most watched legal dramas in crypto. A major hurdle cleared, according to the material.
Okay, so legal clarity achieved, at least on that front, based on these sources. What's next? What about, say, institutional involvement? Did the sources highlight progress there?
Definitely. Moving past the legal side, the sources really zeroed in on another key step: launching XRP Futures on the CME.
CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That's a big deal in traditional finance. When did that happen?
May 19th, according to the material. And it quotes Garlinghouse describing this as most important for XRP's growth going forward.
Most important, why is launching futures on a regulated place like CME considered so vital? What do the sources say?
Well, the explanation in the sources is it provides regulated exposure. It's a way for institutions and even more traditional private investors to get involved with XRP in a way they understand and that fits their compliance needs.
Right, it's like a familiar wrapper for a new asset.
Exactly. And the sources specifically point to this CME launch as a kind of necessary stepping stone towards that potential XRP ETF approval we talked about earlier.
I see. So big money needs these regulated avenues, these familiar structures, before they can really jump in.
That seems to be the argument presented in the sources, yeah. Futures are a common pathway.
Okay, so we've got legal issues settling down, regulated on-ramps being built. What about Ripple's own strategic moves? Any big acquisitions mentioned in the sources?
Yes, there was a significant one. The material details Ripple acquiring a brokerage firm called Hidden Road.
Hidden Road. And the price tag.
A hefty $1.25 billion, according to the sources.
Wow. Okay, and what's the plan? Why buy a brokerage firm?
The stated purpose, as per the sources, is pretty clear. They want to integrate Hidden Road's activity onto the XRP ledger.
Integrate brokerage activity onto the ledger itself. What's the goal there?
The sources suggest the aim is to boost the use of Ripple's own stablecoin, RLUSD.
RLUSD. Like a Ripple dollar.
Essentially, yeah. They want to strengthen its use for institutional trading. Specifically, Garlinghouse is quoted saying this helps push wider adoption of digital assets, especially in the U.S. market.
So it's about building the actual infrastructure, the plumbing, for professional trading, using their tech and their stablecoin.
Precisely. It's about making the XRP ledger a venue for serious financial activity.
Okay, so if you line these up, the legal settlement, the CME futures, this big Hidden Road acquisition focused on institutional trading on the ledger, the sources really do seem to paint a picture of like foundational pieces clicking into place.
It does suggest a very deliberate strategic build-out, at least based on the narrative in the material we reviewed.
And it wasn't just these big structural moves, right? The sources also touched on other things, the community, relationships, the bigger vision.
Yeah, exactly. Beyond those core developments, there were definitely other interesting tidbits about the broader environment.
Like that kind of cryptic tweet involving Justin Sun.
Huh. Yeah, that was noted in the sources. May 31st, Justin Sun from TRON tweets, "Let's cook," and directly references Brad Garlinghouse.
Let's cook. What does that even mean?
Well, who knows for sure, but the sources mentioned it immediately sparked a lot of speculation online about some kind of collaboration maybe brewing between TRON and Ripple.
Did it affect prices?
Temporarily, yeah. The sources noted a little bump for both XRP and TRX right after. It's a small thing, but shows how the market reacts to these hints of, industry dynamics.
Interesting. And didn't the sources also mention a community event? Something in Vegas?
Yes, XRP Las Vegas.
Hmm.
The material pulled some key comments from Garlinghouse there.
What did he say?
He apparently talked about Ripple's ambitions, saying something like they plan to surprise the world about how big of a dent we can put in the universe. Pretty bold.
Putting a dent in the universe. Okay.
Mhm.
Anything else?
He also gave what the sources called a heartfelt thank you to the XRP community, acknowledged it's been tough the last few years, and showed appreciation for their support.
That community connection is important, especially after all the legal uncertainty.
Definitely. And speaking of community, one source included a, let's say, pointed observation comparing the vibe at XRP Las Vegas to other crypto events.
Oh, what was the take?
Well, this particular source offered the view that the XRP event felt like it had more, quote, respectable, normal people,
Okay.
and contrasted that with the Bitcoin conference, which this source characterized as more freak showish.
Ah, okay. Well, that's certainly perspective from one of the sources. Interesting glimpse into perceived community differences, I guess.
Yeah, just reporting what was in the material there, it shows these different facets are being discussed.
It's fascinating how these sources give you these snapshots.
Yeah.
And tying back to the bigger picture, the sources brought up a really significant idea about how technology and competition work, didn't they?
They did. The concept that technology isn't necessarily a zero-sum game, meaning the idea presented, possibly linked to comments from Garlinghouse or maybe David Schwartz, is that success for one project, say Bitcoin, doesn't automatically mean failure for another, like XRP.
So it's not winner take all.
The perspective in the sources is more about growing the entire pie, focusing on expanding the whole digital asset space together rather than just fighting over the current slice.
That makes sense, especially if you have a really massive goal in mind. And the sources did talk about a huge long-term goal, right?
Oh, yeah. The vision outlined is, well, it's incredibly ambitious, essentially rewiring the entire global banking system.
The entire banking system, wow.
Yeah. The material suggests that maybe people are underestimating just how profound that kind of change would be. And it implies that achieving something on that scale absolutely requires cooperation, not just competition.
Rewiring global banking. That sounds like decades of work. Did the sources mention any kind of time frame?
They did suggest a potential time frame of maybe 5 to 10 years for this level of systemic shift.
5 to 10 years. That's surprisingly soon for something so massive.
Well, Garlinghouse is quoted indicating that things are already moving in that direction. So the indication is the process has begun.
It certainly puts those recent steps, the settlement, the futures, the acquisition, into a much broader context, thinking about that kind of end game.
Absolutely. Changes the perspective.
Did the sources also give us a quick feel for the general crypto market weather during all this?
A little bit, yeah. One source described the overall market mood as a period of confusion.
Sounds about right for crypto sometime.
Yeah. And it noted that many altcoins, especially those outside the top 10, had hit a rough patch recently. There was even a slightly humorous line cited, RIP alt season, May 7, May 30.
Okay, so choppy waters for many alts. And XRP's price. Did they mention that?
Just briefly as context, the source noted XRP was trading somewhere around the $2.18 mark during that period. Just a bit of market color provided in the material.
Got it. And looking forward, was there anything else flagged in the sources? An upcoming event, maybe?
Yes, the XRPL Apex 2025 event. It was announced for Singapore, June 10th to 12th.
Apex 2025. What's the buzz around that, according to the sources?
The expectation noted is that there could be some significant announcements made there, and key Ripple executives are planning to be there. President Monica Long, CTO David Schwartz are mentioned.
So potentially more news on the horizon.
Okay.
Let's try and pull this all together then, based on the sources we've unpacked.
We've seen the legal clouds clearing with the SEC settlement.
Right, and concrete steps towards getting institutions involved, the CME Futures, the hidden road deal for on-ledger trading.
Plus that bold prediction for an XRP ETF next year.
Don't forget the community engagement, that dent in the universe ambition.
And underpinning it all, this massive long-term vision of rewiring global finance, framed as a collaborative effort over maybe the next 5–10 years.
It's quite a narrative laid out in the material, covering recent wins and future goals.
Definitely a comprehensive picture painted by the sources you provided.
So here's the thought to leave you with. Based on everything we've just discussed from these sources, you're this huge ambition, right? Rewiring the entire global banking system in 5–10 years.
Yeah, it's almost hard to grasp the scale.
So the question is, how do these specific, almost incremental steps we talked about, the legal wins, the futures products, buying a brokerage firm, how do those fit into that grand vision presented in the sources?
Are they just isolated tactical moves? Or are they, as the material seems to suggest, calculated steps on a much longer, very deliberate path towards that massive goal? What do you think?
This deep dive came straight from the source material you gave us. We traced the path from legal fights and marketplace.
Right up to this huge, almost science fiction level ambition described by Ripple's leadership in the sources.
Think about that journey. From the nitty-gritty of a settlement figure or a futures launch.
To the idea of fundamentally changing global money movement within a decade.
As you follow this story, keep asking yourself how those smaller pieces we unpack from the sources relate to that enormous objective. What challenges does that path present? And what possibilities does the narrative in the material really suggest for the road ahead?